Hello and welcome to episode 135 of The Thing About Golf, Golf Australia magazine's ongoing exploration of why people from all walks of life get so hooked on this game. Rod Morrie in the host chair, but it's John Huggan who'll handle the interviewing duties for this episode, which, as it turns out, is quite timely. As players prepare to tee off in this week's New Zealand Open at Millbrook Resort, we sit down with a two-time winner of the event and a member of one of New Zealand's most revered sporting families. Greg Turner might have won 4 times on the European Tour, 9 times on the Australasian circuit, and been a member of the only International President's Cup team to win the trophy, but he's jokingly considered an underachiever in his own family. Older brothers Glenn and Brian excelled in the national teams of cricket and hockey, and Brian went on to become the nation's poet laureate. But Greg is no slouch himself. As you'll hear, he has an extraordinarily keen mind and an engaging disposition with thoughtful opinions on every aspect of both golf and life. It's a worthwhile chat and one you'll probably want to come back to later to make sure you didn't miss any nuggets. I found this a particularly enjoyable discussion and I hope that you do too.
Okay, welcome to the latest edition of the Thing About Golf podcast. My guest this time around is a familiar name and one of the few men who can say that he played in a winning team in the international side on the President's Cup. Greg Turner, what was and is the thing about golf for you?
Yeah, well, it's been a part of my life for a long time, Huggy. Golf's the funny thing about golf to me is it kind of mirrors life in many ways. You know, it's sort of it's sporty, that it's not fair. You can do all the right things and end up with the wrong results, and you can do the wrong things and end up with the right results, and that kind of makes it a pretty fascinating game, doesn't it?
So you subscribe to the metaphor for life theory, do you?
Well, if that's what it is, yes, I think I do.
Okay, well, let's get back. Let's start. I always like to do some "this is your life" stuff at the beginning of this. What got you into golf? I mean, you're from a pretty high achieving, I said, people is well known, I think, that high achieving sporting family, but not in golf. But you headed off in that direction. What was the reason that your brothers did other things that you went into golf?
Oh, look, I don't think so. I think, chance plays a major factor in a lot of things. That when I grew up in southern New Zealand, I think, it was at a time when kids played sport, full stop. I played soccer, and I played hockey, and I played cricket and tennis, and you played anything. I think we had one television channel, so you got out and did stuff. So golf, it was purely really a chance. I mean, I've got 2 brothers, but they're sort of 15 and 19 years older than me. So I sometimes joke it was more like having 3 fathers, really. They were well gone by the time I was, can recall. So I was sort of like an only child in that sense. So golf was something you could whack around the backyard, a ball. And then when I got to high school, as they did in those days, they set you and put you in a class, and they set you in alphabetical order. And the guy that sat beside me was a guy named David Skeggs, and he played golf. So I ended up sort of going to the golf course with him because, we sat beside each other in class. And,
let me turn that question round a bit then.
So that got me started. And then, sometimes you sort of think back and what. I got really interested in the game, and perhaps part of it was that it was something that I wasn't living up to or feeling like I had to live up to the expectations of others based on my brother's performances. I don't think that was a conscious thing at the time, but potentially that had an impact in that I was, I wasn't Glenn Turner's brother or Brian Turner's brother when I was on the golf course, whereas I was when I was on the hockey field or the cricket pitch.
Well, just to fill in people who don't know, your brother Glenn he probably still is one of the best Test opening batsmen ever, and your other brother Brian played hockey for New Zealand and turned out to be the poet laureate for New Zealand. I mean, you're a bit of a disappointment, really, are you not?
To many people, in many ways, yes.
But, so when did it become clear that golf was your path to glory, if you can put it that way?
Well, it didn't really. I was a pretty decent hockey player and a pretty decent cricketer. But I made a couple of started making provincial sides, and then I made the national under 18, under 21 teams in golf. And then I got a scholarship to go to Oklahoma. So there wasn't a lot of cricket or field hockey in Oklahoma, to be fair to say. So, so that sort of that put the others well and truly on the back burner.
What was that like, Oklahoma?
It was great. I mean, it was a culture shock. I'm struggling to think of a place more different to where I grew up. I remember I got a call. I was playing the Australasian under 21 champs in Brisbane, actually, and I got a call. God knows how the coach at Oklahoma, a guy named David Yates, God knows how he got hold of my location, but the phone rang in the hotel room at about 3 a.m, and it was the coach from Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma, wondering whether I was interested in coming to play golf there. And I had to get up the next morning, and it was well before the days of the internet, go and find an atlas somewhere to work out where the hell Oklahoma was. But yeah, it was a again in those days, early 80s, traveling to what amounted to the other side of the world and a completely different sort of culture and competitive environment was, it was a real sink or swim. And I really enjoyed it. I was there 2 and a bit years. I enjoyed everything about it pretty much. But, and certainly I don't think I would have, I think it would have been much harder to embark on a career had I not had that experience and then the assistance that sort of came from that.
It's a pretty massive decision, especially back then, especially somebody from the bottom tip of New Zealand to head off to somewhere in America without really knowing, as you just said, where it is. I'm always amazed that somebody at that age can make. What did your parents have to say about that?
Look, they were pretty supportive. I mean, it was, I guess, again, part of growing up in a family where success at sport at an international level wasn't considered unusual. My brothers had been traveling the world playing sport well in advance of me getting to that stage. So it didn't seem like it was, perhaps that was quite an important fact, that it didn't seem like that was an extraordinary thing to do. Therefore, and I travelled a bit, I travelled to Australia playing golf, and my brother Glenn had taken me over to the UK to spend a couple of months with him when I was a bit younger while he was playing county cricket. And, so I sort of, travelling wasn't unusual, albeit that going, heading off to live somewhere was certainly a bit of a jump. But, I just felt that, I don't think I ever had any doubt that it was the right thing to do, or that I wanted to do it. And, fortunately, I sort of played okay early on, and therefore I didn't sort of have a period of where there was any doubt really in my mind.
Who were your contemporaries? Who did you play with and against at that time?
Yeah, it was a decent team. It was a guy named Andrew McGee who went on and won on the US tour. It was interesting. So Oklahoma was sort of a top 30 team, but it wasn't a top 10 team, and the coach there had real difficulty in recruiting the top American players, because if you wanted to go down to that part of the country and play, then Oklahoma State and University of Houston and University of Texas were all really big schools. So he was, he couldn't get the top American players, albeit that an Andrew McGee had a pretty good player. Yeah. So, funnily enough, it was, of all people, I think it was Steve Elkington that helped, because he was at Houston, and Coach Yates had asked him whether there were any good young players in Australia, and he said, well, actually the best couple of young players down in that part of the world are a couple of Kiwis, and mentioned me and another guy, Phil Aiken. And whether that was because he didn't want any Australians taking the limelight from him, who knows? But that sort of led to the introduction, if you like. So it's amazing how those things can occur.
And what sort of, how much better a player were you when you left, excuse me, than when you arrived? And what sort of life lessons did you pick up at college? I mean, college is lessons in life, I always think, more than anything, just about. So.
Yeah. And, look, I don't know what it is. I mean, certainly back then, it was a real, it was a culture shock in some ways. And that, the Americans, New Zealand, if you're a bit cocky, you got put in your place pretty quickly. Whereas in America, it was almost encouraged. If you weren't confident, outwardly confident, it was sort of seen as a weakness. And I think in a funny way that probably helped. In terms of as a golfer, it helped. I'm not sure it helps in terms of as a person, but But I guess it taught me not to be, or it was okay to be confident. It was okay to actually back yourself. And I think I was a bit fortunate. I played okay. I think I made second team All-American in my freshman year. So I played well enough that that I sort of earned the right to be sort of confident, I guess, in my own ability. So, and the other thing that was important then is, the courses you played over there were far superior to what we played on courses and the conditions, what we were playing on in New Zealand at the time. So it would have been pretty hard from, the jump from playing your regular sort of club courses in New Zealand to playing the sort of courses you played on, professionally would have been a lot, it would have been a much higher climb, if you like. So that was a pretty important part as well.
Were you kind of reassured, if you like, that when you went all that way, that to discover that you were competitive at that level? I know you well enough to know that you're one of the most competitive people I've ever met, to the point where you won't even let me beat you on occasion. So, where did you have that when you arrived, or did that get encouraged or enhanced in your time there?
Well, my brothers, bless them, when Glenn especially, I think, took it upon himself when he was back in New Zealand with his young brother that he would instill a competitive nature. I mean, he was a pretty competitive sort of guy, and in fact, they took it upon themselves when we went out to play golf to try and rattle me, to try and sledge and wind me up, it was their goal was to get me upset. So I think that was that perhaps helped. I mean, it was an environment at that time where technique wasn't such a important thing. Nobody was thinking much about technique. There was the tried and true sort of coaching at the time, and there weren't coaches standing on the range going, well, that guy's going to struggle because of his grip or because of this or because of that. So you could just go and play. And but certainly, I think playing pretty decently early on was a help.
It's funny you mentioned technique. I was going to get to this in a bit, but since you bring it up, we'll talk about it now. I mean, did your technique get found out a little bit later on? I mean, people have had slumps in golf before, but you had the mother of all slumps, I know. So I wanted you to talk a bit about that and how that transpired and how you got the hell out of it in the end.
I mean, the short answer is my technique did catch up on me. Yes, I had a technique which would have, I guess, you might have described as old school in those days, and there was a bit of a revolution that occurred in the 80s with Bid Bitter and the high speed camera sort of basically putting a lie to a lot of the traditional thinking on what was actually happening in the golf swing and what was best to happen. So that all sort of happened at the same time. My game sort of I went into a bit of a slump, and then I couldn't fix it because I didn't really know what I was doing technically. So you can. I don't think you need where technical understanding helps is when things go awry. If they never go right, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. Well, look at Colin Montgomery. He's a perfect example of that.
Well,
there are clue what he's doing.
Well, there are a few through the years, but it's just harder to fix it if it goes wrong. And I went wrong, and then I went down the wrong track trying to fix it. You think you know what you're doing, and you don't. So I was at a pretty low ebb, but I guess fortunately, if you like the benefit of hindsight, fortunately that was the time when there was a whole lot more knowledge coming into what was happening in the golf swing, and there was some coaching that was coaches around who were really starting to understand that. So I took a bit of a plunge, went and worked with a guy, Dennis Pugh, who you probably know.
Yes, indeed.
And he sort of and I'd always been one to go fairly hard at stuff. When I made a decision to do something, I did it. And he basically said to me at the time, well, I can try and put you back together the way you were, or I can take you down another track. And frankly, I think it's probably easier to throw out the old and bring the new than it would be to try and piece it all back together. You've got that far off out of sync. So I said, "What,
Greg? How bad was it? I mean, because I remember just how bad it was, but I need it in your words."
Well, I can remember it was. You want to talk about a pretty humbling experience. When we made that decision, we went out at Wentworth. It was at the British Masters at Woburn that I first met Dennis, and we made that decision. So we decided the next week, Monday or Tuesday, whatever it was, we were going to start, and it was completely throw out the old and start anew. And we found this little quiet range down the back at Wentworth, and all I could do basically was hit shanks and tops and trying to do what he was doing. And I'd just started and out wandered Nick Faldo, who had just won the Masters, and I think he might have even won the British Masters a week before, and with a film crew to do stuff for Golf Digest or something like that. And so there was me shanking, topping, just looking like a 36 handicapper and the best player in the world at the time, standing 20 yards away with a film crew. So I think Dennis might have decided at that time when he saw that, well, okay, this, if I could stick with it through that, then maybe I was worth spending some time on.
You've skimmed over one vital fact in that story, though. I mean, Dennis reminded me of this the other day when I told him that we were doing this, and he said, well, you almost caused the death of the aforementioned major champion that day.
You maybe one of the attributes I perhaps possessed was the ability to put the bad stuff out of my mind. So that's something I can't recall. Maybe that was right.
Well, Dennis has it that one of your aforementioned shanks just about decapitated Faldo. So.
Well, there's every chance that that's true.
Anyway, moving right along. Having gone to Oklahoma, I'm interested in the fact that you then didn't go PGA Tour route, or try to, or maybe you did in some way, but you ended up in Europe, which was the more normal route for Antipodeans, if you like, at that point.
Yeah. Well, look, by the time I left, we built a pretty good team. McGee had become a top, one of the top players. We'd recruited Grant Waite and Craig Perks had come out of New Zealand. Todd Hamilton was in the team, and we were all of a sudden the top 10. Top 5 team. There was a bit of excitement around. There was some American guys who were happy to throw a little bit of money in behind me when I decided to turn pro, which wouldn't have happened out in New Zealand again. Which was, that there was a real, that wasn't an abnormal thing in the States whereas it was in New Zealand. So I sort of decided that the path was going to be to go back down under and play the Australasian season. And then up to Asia, as the tours kind of blended together in those days, it was about probably 16 or 18 weeks in Australia, New Zealand, and 9 weeks in Asia. And that sort of led nicely into the European season, which only really started in sort of May in those days, I guess.
Yeah.
So my sort of plan was to play a season down under and sort of get used to the professional side of things. And then, then either head to Europe or back to the tour schools in Europe or the States. I played well in Australia and in Asia. I had a win. I won the New Zealand PGA, I think my third event. And then I played pretty nicely on the Asia. I lost in a playoff in Singapore. Did well enough anyway in those that I think that got me through to the finals, directly through to the finals of the tour school in Europe. So I went there and did nicely. I think I finished third from memory. Latherbell and Jose Maria might have won it or finished second at Ansawa, Argentina. Anyway, which got me, high enough up on the pecking order, if you like, in Europe that I was getting in most of the events. And then I won in my first season, so I won in Scandinavia. So, all of a sudden I had that sort of exemptions, and so it was still at that stage probably in the back of my mind that I'd go to the US, but frankly, I just enjoyed Europe.
Yeah.
I found it a fascinating place, and it was a time when the tour was really growing. There was a lot of excitement around, what the likes of Sevi and Nick were doing, and Bernard Langer was really starting to shine, and golf was really growing on the continent, and we were going to some fascinating places. It just sort of. Yeah, after 2 or 3 years there, and then I went back and I played a couple of events in the States, and I thought, well, actually, I'm not sure I could cope with. I don't know if I was good enough anyway, I think I've always been psychologically, if you like, more European than North American. And while I enjoyed my time in America, the idea of living there and playing there became less and less appealing as I spent more and more time in Europe.
Yeah, well, what you ended up doing was actually pretty much the norm. I mean, there were a few exceptions, Elkington being one, that Aussies that stayed, or New Zealanders that stayed, went to America and stayed. But most of them gravitated first to Europe and then maybe went back to America. But at least they went through Europe at some point, just like you did.
Yeah, and there was a real camaraderie in Europe. There were a bunch of Aussie and Kiwi players, Australians especially there, and we've, in spite of the way we like to think of each other, we actually get on pretty well. So it was, it was a fun time to be involved. When you look back now, you think, gosh, it seems like, why wouldn't you have gone to the States? There was so much more money, but it didn't. I don't know whether it was just the time or it didn't feel like money was quite as important as perhaps it's regarded now.
Well, that's certainly true. I mean, it's a pretty low bar when it comes to money these days in terms of how it's viewed. But anyway, everyone talks about the European Tour, the kind of era that you're talking about, how the camaraderie and the fun was so much better, certainly than America, and certainly than it is now. In Europe, I mean, it's changed a bit. It's still there. I think the basis is still there, but the kind of ethos is definitely the money changes people and changes things inevitably, and it's not quite what it was in your time. But what was the most fun aspect of it? Everyone talks about how much fun it was. Let's delve into that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. We could all, there is a tendency to sort of look at the past through rose-tinted glasses, isn't it? You remember the good, not the bad. I guess the fact that there wasn't as much money, and therefore we sort of travelled. Quite often, you go from event to event rather than back home to wherever home base was. So Sunday nights and Monday nights were pretty social. Yeah, and again back then, because perhaps because English wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now, when you're in a lot of those places where there wasn't much English spoken, therefore there was almost a necessity to be a little more a little bit more camaraderie, a bit more collegiality, if you like. It's hard to know whether it would have been the same if everybody spoke the lingo, but yeah. So that was, I think that traveling as a group, that being part of something that was growing, that going to interesting places for the first time, all sort of, there was probably no one thing that made a difference, but just collectively, it just made for a lot more collegiality, is I think the word I'd say. Guys, it never felt like, it felt like guys generally, we were as competitive as hell, but not to the extent of, I think there was much more of a feeling as you were competing against the golf course in the game, not against each other. Whereas,
I think, what kind of gets lost in the midst of all that, you touched on it slightly there, how competitive it was. People forget sometimes in the midst of all this, fun and games stuff that you hear about, that the very many of the very best players in the game at that time were playing in Europe or were from Europe. So, I don't know whether that crossed your mind. I want to play against the best players, and they're here, for goodness sake.
Well, again, I don't recall that being front of mind, but I mean, it wasn't. It was a fact. Sevi, Faldo, Woosnam, Langer. Norman had kind of gone by the time I got there, which is not probably a bad thing. And we, Europe were just starting to win Ryder Cups, and it was, you didn't feel like, I at no stage did I particularly feel like you were second cousins playing in Europe. It felt like you were part of something, where, as you say, a lot of the best players in the world were there. So you were competing against them on a weekly basis. And yes, the money wasn't quite as the same, but as I said, it didn't. I mean, that certainly in my case, that wasn't actually particularly front of mind. There was plenty, there was still plenty of money. And it was growing quickly. So, it was a period that we're always prone, as I said, looking at things through rose-colored glasses. But I do think probably there would be a lot that would say that was a period that sort of that late 80s, mid-late 80s, 90s, where it was a period that was a lot of fun. It was a great time for golf in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Just in the midst of all that, either side of the aforementioned slump, you were winning at a fairly decent rate. And I'm looking at, I made a wee list of some of the runners-up in the events that you did win. Pretty impressive, I have to say. Nobilo, Norman, Roger Davis, Duffy Waldorf, Monty, Rocker, Stadler. I mean, you beat some pretty good players down the stretch. And our mutual friend Mike Clayton said, you've got to get him to tell him the story about beating Greg Norman, which I don't know. So you're going to have to fill me in on that one.
Well, Greg I was lucky enough to beat him. On a couple. He beat me, by the way, an awful lot more often than I beat him.
Yes.
But I do recall the Palmettos Cup in Australia. There was a sort of a halcyon days of events in Australia, if you like, a brief period where the Japanese were investing a lot of money in resorts in Australia. And they had some pretty big tournaments. And I'd won the end of the season. I won the Johnny Walker at Royal Melbourne, which was both a real boon, because it was a hell of a tournament. It had the Normans and the Curtis Strangers and the Woosnams and the Faldos and the Raymond Floyds, and there was a lot of the best players in the world at the time. So to beat a field of that caliber, but also around a course, I think I've always had a real interest in. Well, for a lot of my career, I've had an interest in golf course architecture. So to win around Royal Melbourne as well kind of felt pretty, as though, if you can beat a field like that around a course like that, then you ought to feel pretty good about yourself. But that was the last tournament of the season, and the first tournament of the next season in January was at Palm Meadows in Brisbane, and I'd had it would be fair to say probably a fairly relaxed Christmas, New Year break.
Right.
But I'd won a bunch of money and were feeling pretty good about myself. So probably it would be fair to say it wouldn't have been the period of time where I wore out the driving range. And I came back to first tournament of the season and opened up 74-62. And I was playing with Greg on the Saturday, and he was world number one, and in Queensland the local. He's a hero in Australia, let alone in Queensland. So, and I was playing with him in the last group on the Saturday, and he, I played a lot of golf. Pretty much the same thing happened on the first tee every time. The scorer, the starter gives you your card and the local rules sheet and a pin sheet, and you go and you swap cards with the other guy and make small talk, or it's always a nervous spot. Anyway, I went over to swap cards, and he looked at me and said, "I'll swap cards when I'm ready," and turned around and walked away. And I thought, okay. I said to my caddy at the time, I said, "What, did you see that?" And he was like in shock. I went, but I said, why is he worried about me? I'm number 160 something in the world, and lucky to be that, and he's number one. His golf game was intimidating enough without. Anyway, I don't know what was going on, whether he was trying to. Anyway, it had the reverse effect with me. It kind of made me feel like, oh well, that's kind of a compliment. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I was lucky enough to go on to win that by a few shots, and I thought to myself afterwards, I thought, well, that didn't work, did it, Greg? But as I said, his career is he beat me an awful lot of times more often than I beat him.
Yeah. What was he like at the end of that round compared with the beginning then?
Oh, he was fine after 2 or 3 holes. He was his best mate, you know. He's an unusual cat, Greg. I don't think probably I'm the first person to say that. So he could be affable and nice, or he could be quite the opposite. And it seemed to me, viewing, from my interactions with him through the years, that you never quite knew which Greg you were going to get. He was fine for most of the rest of the day.
How did you approach playing with the likes of him? And, Seve was intimidating, I'm sure. Faldo certainly would be. Even, playing with Woozy would be a bit more convivial, I think, but still intimidating in its own way. I mean, you're playing against those guys. How different was it, and how did you handle it?
It was, I always thought it was I always really looked forward to being drawn with one of the top players. Because I was interested for a start. I remember Seve. First time I played with Seve was at Carmageon, and I had been, that was probably my second year in Europe when I think about it. So, but I'd always admired his game. He came to New Zealand and played one in my hometown, and when he was just a young fella, and that was pretty inspirational. So I'd always held him in pretty high esteem. And I used to, if we were on opposite sides of the draw, and I'd go out and walk 9 holes just to watch him, just to see what he did and how he did. And the first time we played together, he brought that up. He said, "I see." He says, "You come in and you watch me play sometimes." Yeah. And I went, "Oh yeah, I do." I said, I'm always trying to learn, And actually, he was pretty generous with his time. When he'd see me practicing, when I was, especially short game, if I was out practicing short game and he was there, he'd sometimes come over and talk to me about what he was trying to do and give me a little bit of advice. And that was that was a side of him that probably a lot of people didn't see. And I suspect that was because he noticed that I was interested and had regard for him. So, and that's the way I kind of looked at it when I played with those, with the best in the world is that, what's to learn here? What can I, and sometimes the other thing is you realize that they're not bulletproof. They hit bad shots and they have their weaknesses and they have their stresses and you're not alone in that. So I look forward to that rather than being intimidated by it, I think.
Yeah. As we're on the subject of winning, we have to. I touched on it right at the beginning. Obviously, the President's Cup. You're not very many. There are not very many guys like you walking around that have played in a winning team that are not American. Talk to me about Royal Melbourne '98 and how great that was, and also the great myth that's grown up around Peter Thompson's selection of you and Frank Nobilo as the great friends from New Zealand who were going to play together and do well, which turned out to be the case, obviously. But talk to me, or just tell me the story of the 98 President's Cup from your point of view.
Well, for one thing, it still might be my fondest memory of my playing days, I think. And that's, partly, I think, because I think growing up in a country where team sport was the primary, was the top of the list. I think, and we don't get to do it much in golf. So, and that particular event, there was a real team ethic around it. I think that and perhaps it had been, again, just a convergence of things. They'd been beaten pretty badly, and I don't know, was it a fourth or fifth? I can't remember which one it was. But all of the previous ones had been in the States, so they'd kind of been the American galleries can be somewhat parochial, one might say. So there'd been, a lot of the guys in that, and it was a hell of a team. A lot of the guys in that team had kind of been, had suffered at the brunt of that. So I think, probably they saw the best chance of actually getting one back was going to be playing, going to be that year. And it was a really good team, and the guys were playing well, and the weather conspired nicely for us. It was 18, 19 degrees every practice round, and the course was sort of pretty receptive. It didn't blow much, and then the first morning it blew 40 from the north, and I think it was about 40 degrees. And every blowfly in Australia descended upon the course, and you may as well not have played a practice round. The course changed so much so quickly, and there was a bunch of us in that team that had played there and played in Australia and at Royal Melbourne, with relative frequency, or in that sandbelt as well. Yeah. And so we were sort of probably better prepared to adapt quite quickly. So, there were a few things that came together. Yeah, Frank and I mean, we'd played a lot of stuff together, a lot of World Cups and Dunhill Cups, and so we were very familiar with each other. We probably weren't, he'd sort of gone off to the States, and we hadn't seen a lot of each other a few years, and, we weren't, we probably weren't the top of each other's calling card at the time. So we probably weren't quite as good of mates as Peter thought we were. But, and there was that, he put us off first match at sort of 8 in the morning, and I just loved it. There was all of this discussion about why he would put the two Kiwis out first, and as it turned out, it was against Duval and O'Meara, who were, I think, about 1 and 3 in the world at the time. We weren't hot favourites, to be fair to say. And I think Peter's answer to that question was, well, it's 10 o'clock in the morning New Zealand time. They'll be well awake.
What was Thompson like as a captain? I mean, I was around him a fair bit and interviewed him a few times, and I thought he was a fascinating character. And he had a very, outwardly simplistic attitude to golf and how to play golf well. How did that manifest itself as a captain?
Yeah, I mean, Peter was, he was an elder statesman by then. So it wasn't as if we were all, we hadn't been drinking beers in the pubs around the world together playing. And he could be, he was aloof's maybe not the right word, but he was never going to be the convivial sort of, he was always one step back. He as you say, he had a fairly simplistic approach, but I think that was born out of quite a lot of, there's less to this game than meets the eye, sort of thing. I don't think he was. I think he did a lot of thinking to come up with simple answers. Put it that way. And I think he reckoned. I mean, part of what he did really well was, I think, his selection of Wayne Grady as vice captain was a really good idea, because Grades was the sort of the have a beer with the boys, and he was one of the boys type guys. So I think they were a perfect match, if you like, given the circumstances. And you had some pretty strong characters in that team. But again, I think the fact that they'd suffered some defeats in previous events probably brought everybody together, and Tomo was a legend, and certainly in Australia. So it was just one of those things that a whole lot of things seemed to align. And I did bring that up to Ernie Els a few years ago when we were over there. That I said, Ernie, you do realise that the only time the international won is when we had 2 Kiwis on the team, and you haven't selected anybody from New Zealand.
I'm sure he laughed at that.
Yeah.
Can you remember much about Sunday night that day, the final night once it was done? It must have been pretty wild, was it not?
It was a pretty big night. Well, the other thing, I had a great mate of mine, a guy named John Clark, who sadly passed away a few years ago, who's a New Zealand and comedian that moved to Australia and was sort of I think he was voted one of the most respected people on television in Australia years and years in a row. Very, very entertaining. Anyway, he came. I invited him. He came to the party, and he thought it was fantastic. We were staying at the Crown Casino, and they'd given us all $10,000 in stake money to go and gamble in the high rollers room. And I think they had to give it to everybody on the team because they couldn't really they didn't give a shit about Greg Turner. They wanted Greg Norman and Nick Price and Ernie. They wanted them in there, but they couldn't really give them the money and not us. So and you had to gamble it. You couldn't cash it in. So, and I don't like casinos. I've found them sort of depressing sort of places. So we got to about 11 o'clock that night, and I said to John, shit, I said, I've got to go and gamble this money. So we went into the high rollers room, and I put half of it on red and half of it on black, one spin of the wheel, and got my 9,008, whatever it was, cashed it, and went back to the party section.
Brilliant.
And John thought that was the best. He thought that was very, very, very funny indeed. Exactly the opposite of what they wanted us to do. But the other funny thing about that was that Jack Nicklaus was the captain of the American team, and he, good mate of mine in New Zealand, a guy Dick Fraser, had sort of the top fly fishing lodge in New Zealand, and Jack had gone out there fishing every year, and he'd said to me a few weeks earlier, he said, Jack's coming over. He's coming over after the President's Cup to fish for a week. He's in his private jet. So I'd sort of, armed with that knowledge, sidled up to Jack at the on the Tuesday or Monday or Tuesday night and said, this, good mate of mine, Dick Fraser. Yeah, Dick. He said, I said, I live down same place as Dick. And, he says, were you going back there after the tournament? I said, yeah, on Monday. He said, how are you getting there? I went, well, Qantas or whatever. Come with me in the jet. I was like, oh, okay. So I had to be on best behaviour and I had my wife and 1-year-old daughter. So I don't know if he realised what he was in for, but So I hitchhiked a ride with Jack Nicklaus after. I thought after we beat them, maybe that offer might have been withdrawn, but he was very magnanimous.
Before we move on from the President's Cup, I have to ask the obvious question, which is why is it so different from the Ryder Cup? In that you look at some of the international teams and you think, woof, pretty good, but they never win. In fact, they get humped pretty regularly. So, in stark contrast with the Ryder Cup, with the Europeans, with teams supposedly inferior, kick ass, basically.
Yeah, look, if I knew the answer to that, I guess it's...
You must have a theory. Come on.
Well, theories are easy, aren't they? Yeah, I guess it's hard. It's got to be a little bit harder to develop sort of a camaraderie. The rest of the world is hardly an entity, right? It's Europe is up until recently anyway. Europe's always sort of felt like more of a legitimate sort of and it surprised me a little bit as the European players have played more and more of them play more and more and live more and more in the United States, whether that's but they still seem to have maintained the same passion and as a group, if you like, for the Ryder Cup. But when you're trying to put together Chinese and Japanese and South Africans and Kiwis and Australians and South Americans, it's like who are they representing really? And albeit that there is, an American opposition is a fairly unifying thing in and of itself. I suspect it's just harder to quite develop those same sort of bonds or that same unity of mission, if you like, that you perhaps get out of Europe. Anyway, that's the best I can come up with.
Yeah. Speaking of sameness, I was going to ask you about this. It'll probably make you smile a little bit. You're one of the very few pro golfers that I've come across in all the years I've covered the game that lean a bit left of centre politically, to the point where, I'm not giving too many secrets away, I think you and I and Thomas Googley had a lot of dinners on the European tour because nobody else would speak to us, basically. But my point is that I've always found it hard to fit in that kind of environment, or at times found it difficult. Have you experienced some of that, or did you just not bother to talk politics with anybody?
It'd be fair to say it's not hard to be seen to be left of centre of your average golf profession, right?
Well,
there's a lot of room.
There's a lot of room left. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I was always interested and continue to be interested in politics and economics, and that was sort of something I used to, spend a lot of time and still do reading about and mulling over. So, yeah, but I grew up in a family that liked to debate and argue, and most of my mates back here. I mean, we've got a lunch group that came together through COVID actually, as a Zoom sort of group, and then it's carried on to have lunch with and with some pretty diverse opinions, most of which are various degrees of right, you might say. But I kind of enjoy that banter and that conversation and challenging and being challenged and I've never really taken it personally. So thinking back to Europe though, there wasn't a lot. I don't recall there being a whole lot of conversation about politics on tour. No. It wasn't something that many of the guys were very interested in. So I don't think it was a case of the fact that you didn't talk about it because people had strong opinions one way or another. You didn't talk about it much because most of the guys weren't really interested, so there wasn't much to talk about. So you end up, as you say, Thomas and I and you, we were probably three that had more of an interest in that sort of thing, albeit that we might have shared some opinions about things, but there weren't that many guys on to it. They're too busy trying to, do their own thing, I think. And I don't know. I suspect that may have changed. Things have got a bit more polarized these days. So I suspect it's a bit of it's quite interesting. I've got some, decent American friends that come down here and play golf in New Zealand a bit. And they're happier to talk politics with me down here than they seem to be at home in America. It's almost like you don't talk religion, you don't talk politics in an American household. I get the impression.
Well, it's so polarizing, especially now. Yeah. I mean, it's splitting families and friends, and to the point where they don't speak to each other anymore, but because of Trump and all the other stuff that's going on. So.
Yeah, which I find quite bizarre because how do you, and I find it quite bizarre that people seem to get more. It seems to me it's more of a crime to change your mind on something than it is to. Whereas the old I'm open to change my mind all the time. The more I learn, if you learn, let's talk about something, and if you convince me I'm wrong, then hopefully I'll change my mind. But it's a bizarre. It's not a helpful thing that sort of seems to have evolved especially over the last decade, I guess.
But I don't want to go into that too much. I think politics is not the subject that people tune into this podcast to hear about. But I wanted to talk to you about which I was there for the week. It was a memorable week when Tiger came to play in the New Zealand Open. Almost the highlight for me though was you making your way to the tee to play in the Pro-Am and what transpired en route. Can you remember that?
Oh, I think that was the first round. I don't think it was actually the Pro-Am.
Was it the first round? Okay. Yeah. Right, okay. Even worse.
It had been a tumultuous week in many ways. And, that's not a week that I choose to look back with great pleasure or fondness of. Yeah. Well, tell the story first and then tell me why you say that. Well, the whole thing was a shambles. But yes, the practice range at Paraparumu, they don't really have a practice field there, so you warm up down the road at a local school. But yeah, they wouldn't let the players bus back in the car park because Tiger was due to arrive. And it was like, well, so they dropped us off down the road. We had to walk sort of 150 yards in the public gates to running late now to get to have a putt before you teed off. And I mean, that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I mean, the whole week had been, to put in context, and I'll get some of the numbers wrong because it's a long time ago, but it was something like, New Zealand Open was traditionally, a season pass was like $50 Kiwi, 20, 25 quid. And then they got Tiger there and they wanted to put it up to $700 for the week.
Yeah.
And he was getting, paid 3 times the entire purse of the tournament. And it just felt to me like such a, well, yeah, I mean, on all sorts of fronts. I'm not blaming him for that, by the way. I mean, but just the whole, what about the people that go to the event every year and now they can't go because it's just too expensive? And it felt wrong on so many fronts. And with the, in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have played. I wasn't going to play, and in the end, I kind of got talked into it. And it would have been better just to go fishing for the week. And
I mean, I must admit, I had quite the opposite view of it as a journalist. It was fantastic. I mean, I didn't have to do anything. The stories just kept on coming. I mean, you left out the part where you were rugby tackled by a security guard running across the course to get to the there were so many things that happened. So part of agreeing to play is that I said I wanted to, on the Tuesday, to have a match with the former New Zealand Open champions, to do a 6-hole skins game that the public could come to for free. That was, let people in and not, which they agreed to do. And then I said, look, the guys that, Bob Charles was playing and Michael Campbell and I think Grant Waite played. Basically the former New Zealand Clates might have even played. Anyway, I caddied in that match.
To me,
I was a caddy.
There you go. There you go. So I said to the organisers, look, it'd be good to put up some sort of prizes for the guys for doing this. Something. Well,
yeah, I remember.
So they put up skins. I think it was a dozen of beer for each skin, and then a couple of bottles of wine for the fight. I mean, it's like they couldn't have. If you were trying to, if you're trying to tell us that we were insignificant, you couldn't have thought of a better way of doing it. So, it was as you say, it was a wonderful week for you, Huggy. But
I mean, I must admit, I do remember the story of I'd gone to the practice ground, obviously, and they wouldn't let me back in either. And I ended up standing next to Roger Chapman in the public, like waiting to get back in, and he just looked at me and he said, "They're really taking the piss now, aren't they?" I mean, a player, a pretty well-known player, he's standing with me in line waiting to get back in.
Yeah. No, it was not a week that I think where the best of people came out.
No. Moving right along, you're one of the few people I can think of, and I can't think of anybody else who did this. You retired from playing or stopped playing at a time when you were still exempt to play on the European Tour. What precipitated that? And before we get into course architecture and all the stuff that came after.
Well, again, several things. One was I had a family, and the kids were about to go to school, and one of the things that when you've got young kids, one of the things about playing on tour is on Wednesdays you play with a lot of successful people from various walks of lives, like a lot of, and when they hear you've got kids, I think every one of them, if it seemed to me, if you asked them again, or said if they had, would say that if they had their time over, they'd have spent more time with their kids. Mm-hmm. That if they had a regret, it was that how quickly goes. And nobody ever said to me, "Oh, I wish I'd spent less time with my kids." So I kind of thought, like, if you don't, I mean, you know, if you keep hearing that from all sorts of people, and it's universal, then it'd be pretty dumb to ignore it, really. So that was sort of, you know, I'd sort of decided that I wanted to stop when the kids went to school, and you know, probably in the back of my mind, I figured that probably the game would have thrown me out by then anyway. And I was at a stage where I was, yeah, I mean, how many years can you spend 40 weeks a year traveling, playing golf and retain that sort of enthusiasm? And I developed a real interest in golf course architecture and was sort of had a fleggling, you know, had already sort of started to prepare for trying to move into that area. So, but yeah, the combination of those things coming together, I just thought, well, you know, why, if you don't do it now, then you're going against all of the rational reasons that you had for stopping. And the fact that you're still playing okay ought to be regarded as a bonus, not as a
yeah. Having listened to all that, I'd be interested to hear what the kids have to say about it, but that's another story.
Well, I've got a pretty good relationship with my kids. And,
yes, I know you do. I'm just winding you up. How would you, before we, as I say, we move into the course architecture part of your life or professional life, how would you rate your playing career against par? It was. Yeah, par's a nice cop out, isn't it? Well,
I had a decent career. It could have been better. Could I have worked harder? Could I have been more? Yes. But then separately, I think, you know, I was never. I don't think I could have sustained my interest in the game for as long as I did if I'd been so committed to the game that was the only thing that mattered. And you know, for me, I could, you know, I had to have something else. So, you know, if I was in Madrid, I wanted to go to the Reina Sofia, or I wanted to go to, you know, the museums and do stuff away from the golf course. I don't think, you know, I wasn't the sort of guy who could have, you know, stayed at the golf course all day and hit balls and all day. You know, I think if I tried to do that, I think I probably wouldn't have lasted as long as I did. So yeah, you know, I'll give myself par.
So no regrets. I mean, I'm looking at your record in majors. I mean, you only got to play in 2 of them, and you only got to play in 14 in total, and 3 PGAs and 11 Opens. T16 best at the PGA, T7 in 1996, your best at the Open when Tom Lehman won at Royal Lytham. Do you look back on that with any regrets that you didn't get to play in the Masters, the US Open, or?
Look, I never. The US Open to me at the time looked like hell, you know,
torture. Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, I never even went and tried to qualify. I was never exempt, so I would have had to go a couple of weeks earlier, and it was, you know, and it just looked like it was, you know, exactly the sort of golf that I really didn't like. So. You know, not that I don't think I was capable of playing it. I just thought it was the epitome of the opposite. You know, it would have been like if they set up the Open Championship like they did at Carnoustie in, was it 99?
Yeah.
If they did that every year, I wouldn't have wanted to play in the Open either.
No, not many would.
Yeah, and you know, timing was just bad for me at Augusta. It was, you know, I think when they went to, you know, they went to top 50 in the world after I'd sort of might have got in through that route, and then they had President's Cup after. You know, most of my career, you sort of had to win in America to go to the Masters. So just the timing, you know, the way I was playing and where I was ranked, you know, during the best parts of my career would now have got me in the Masters on a few occasions, I think. But so, you know, well, I would like to. I'd like to go there as much as anything. I'd just like to see the golf course. Like to, you know, I feel like I know the golf course, but just haven't ever played it. So I didn't play. Yeah, I mean, my major, as you say, 7th is best, and you know, 16th. Yeah, I probably didn't cover myself in glory major championships, but I played. I've always enjoyed the Open, other than Carnoustie that year. As much as anything, because I love the golf courses. Yeah.
What you touched on why I think I share your opinion of what could be called the traditional US Open course of long, rough, narrow fairways. Reducing Greg Turner to the same level as John Huggan. When you miss the fairway, you've got to chop it out. And never saw the point in that much. But the other side of the coin, what did you like, and what did you try and bring to your second career, if you like, when you started designing courses?
Yeah, well, I got interested in, I think I've always been interested, but I got really interested. Funnily enough, traveling, Mike Clayton and I used to travel together a lot. And I think it was, if it was anything, and I had dinner with Tom Doak a while ago, and I said to him, I think it was The Confidential Guide and then his first book on golf that sort of really piqued my interest, and that I started reading. Went, that's, he's right. Yes, that's what it is, sort of thing. And I think Clates might say the same thing. I don't know, but we got, and when I look back at New Zealand, I realised that we had, golf in New Zealand was probably as accessible or more accessible than anywhere else in the world. That we, I think, depending on how you are, amongst as many golf courses per capita or more than anywhere else, and it was cheap. But but we had virtually no examples of really good golf courses. Paraparaumu Beach, Titirangi to a lesser extent, but that was about it. And nobody, and I guess back then people weren't traveling as much, and I just would see golf clubs who didn't have much money anyway, what little they did have, just spending it really badly, not improving what they had, and I just thought there was actually a chance to make a bit of a positive, make a bit of a difference to help, and yes, I'm not going to be pretending it was completely altruistic. I figured if I was going to stop playing when I was 40, I hadn't played well enough that I could retire completely. I needed to earn a crust. So the fact that it was the dearth of decent golf seemed to me that was presented an opportunity as well. So I sort of worked towards that through the last 10 years of my playing career, and that, you read a bunch of stuff. I always sort of simplified things down as, when you go to university, they give you a bunch of books to read by the experts, and then they ask you questions, and if you answer enough of them right, you get a degree. So I just started reading a lot about, and those books that you start reading on golf course architecture lead you to other books. And so I'd done all of that. And then I figured, well, then I needed to get my hands dirty a bit and understand what it actually took to, on the construction side, how do you actually turn the theory into reality? So I played with that a little bit while I was still playing, just with some little renovation jobs and getting out there with guys on the machines and understanding that side of things a little bit, so that I was kind of ready to actually go at it a little bit more seriously when I did stop playing. And that's kind of the way it turned out. I got a couple of breaks. I got an opportunity in my hometown to do some stuff. I paired up with a Kiwi architect golf course architect who was living in Scotland, Scott McPherson, and we got a bit of work, and this has sort of coincided with, I guess, over the last 20 years with a real, there are some great golf courses in New Zealand now. Tom Doak's been down, Cork Crenshaw been down. Project I'm doing at the moment in Queensland, I'm doing it with Gil Hance, and so we've really got some world-class golf here now, and we've had the chance to do some stuff with existing courses that I think's really helped and improved things. So that's been fun, but just getting people to understand that the game, that fun is the kind of fun and variety is the key. That it's the antithesis of what that US Open used to be set up, and I'm pleased to see that seems to be changing a bit too. I watched. God, what did I watch the other day that was just made me tear my hair out? Where ball would run half a metre off the fairway, and it was sort of Dubai was a bit like that. It was probably Dubai, was it? Yeah, Dubai, and that one in America that this week didn't look much fun either. that always felt to me like it was dumbing things down. And, I've had the opportunity, I think, to do some stuff that and get away from that. The job we did at Royal Wellington, I think, everybody said, a lot of people, the greens are pretty severe. I said, have you noticed the fairways are twice as wide as they used to be? So that's been interesting. And I've generally enjoyed it. Golf clubs are not the easiest people to work with. Golf club committees.
It's a lot of bosses, yeah.
A lot of people with fairly strong opinions about things they know bugger all about. But aside from that, it's been quite rewarding, and I think that in making a bit of a career. The other thing about stopping when I did is it gave me a chance to have a decent crack at it. I think if you. Yeah, I don't think I was ever going to be the one that went on, played right through to the seniors and on. So that was never going to be me anyway. But if you've got to give yourself 20 years, otherwise you're just sort of. I mean, I'm still learning every day, and I've been doing it now for 20 years plus. So I don't know what it'd be like if I was just doing it for 5 years.
Yeah. Regular listeners to these podcasts won't be surprised to hear me ask this question. I'd bang on a bit about the distance, how far the ball goes at the elite level. You have a view on that, I know. How do you watch much top level golf these days? And when you do, what do you think?
No, I'm still interested in the majors and things like Ryder Cup, President's Cup, and a few of the. And I'm interested in the odd event when they play. No, I'm not. I think they've let with my clients. Sometimes I say forget about the top guys. We can't build a golf course for Rory. We build a golf course. If we build a golf course with Rory in mind, then we're missing
9,000 yards long for a start.
And by the way, and that's again nothing against Rory. In fact, I really like watching Rory play. But I think I would have loved to. I would have loved to have watched. If you could change things to watch Rory play. With the equipment and on the courses playing the way they did 30 years ago, well, I think he'd have been fantastic.
I've told him that. I'm not sure he believes me, but I've actually told him that exact same thing.
Well, yeah, it's dumbed down things, isn't it? I mean, it's created a situation where so it's not as interesting to me at an elite level as it was. And that could be me too. But as I said, from a golf course design perspective, you pretty much forget about, you can't build something for if guys are going to fly the ball 330, 340 yards, right? So, I played a couple of times with Foxy over here, and we just don't play the same tees, right?
No.
And again, here's a guy who can really hit some golf shots, and he doesn't really have to anymore. He just blasts it.
That's right.
I think he shot little par the other day without hitting a fairway. In Dubai, I think. Not that he drives it terribly wide, but he probably didn't have his best day off the tee. But so I think it's a shame for those guys in a way, because I think they'd enjoy the game more, and I think people would find it more interesting if it didn't quite. If they'd managed to put that, but I don't know how you put the genie back in the bottle. I really don't.
Well, people ask me that a lot, and I say, well, where would you go back to? And my line is always that you go back to the point where they started messing around with the old course at St Andrews. That's where you stop it.
Haven't they always messed around with the old course at St Andrews?
Well, not distance wise. Can you imagine where they're going to put the pins? They're going to the Open back there in 2027. Can you imagine where some of the pins are going to be? My goodness.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, isn't it? So, it's just you just got to hope it blows.
Yeah, well, exactly. And if it doesn't, I mean, the last hole is now a long par 3 that they hit 3 woods at.
Yeah. Well, I don't play much anymore, but I hit the ball as far as I did when I was in my prime. Well, let me tell you, that isn't because I've been in the gym or on the practice.
I think you and I are both living proof of that. Yeah. To finish up, and again, this is a question I almost compelled to ask. The big picture at pro level is, what's going on, live golf, the talks. Is there a solution? What you're looking at it like me from a bit of a distance now. What do you think?
Well, look, I'm not a fan of live in any way, shape, or form. I think it's, I don't, a bit of disruption, I think is probably good. I think, things needed to be shaken up. I don't think that's the right direction.
Now, let me ask you that. Let me ask you this though, and this is how I think of it sometimes: is that people get bogged down with the source of the money on live. If the money had come from some, acceptable in inverted commas source, would people look at this any differently? Do you think?
I'm sure some would. I mean, frankly, that's not why I don't like. Do I feel a great love for the regime in Saudi? No, but I think we've been a little bit hypocritical if we're very happy to buy their oil and sell them, and then we expect individuals to make more of a stand than we would collectively through our governments. Yeah. Well, that's so that's one reason you might not like what's going on there, but to me, that's the least significant. I just think the whole, it's not a meritocracy there. I mean, Ben Campbell's just got, and good on Ben for getting on there. He's a really good young New Zealand player, but he got on because he got picked. He shouldn't have to get. He shouldn't have to be because he's played well enough that he ought to be able to go. He's a good enough player that there ought to be a much more legitimate route to moving forward than the relying on Bubba Watson to pull his name out of a hat. And I find that but again, the disruption's not terrible because I think the tours have got pretty lazy. I think there's a certain irony in the fact that it's taken that. When I was on the players committee 25, 30 years ago, I don't know what it was, I argued that everybody should get something each week. It's hard enough to get on the tour that it actually would make things more competitive if guys should, you pile all the money at the top end, it makes it even harder for a young guy to come through. So anyway, there's a certain irony that's taken that for them to actually recognise that perhaps that competition is not going to end because they're going to try and cover someone's expenses. As I say to my friends over here, can you imagine if you said to the back line of the All Blacks, well, actually, you're going to pay your own way to play in Europe this year? We're going to pay the forwards twice as much, but you guys, you can pick, you're going to play your own. Anyway, so the disruption's not a bad thing. I think the reaction to it to me is kind of has me scratching my head. It's like so more limited field tournaments with huge amounts of money are supposed to be the answer to the threat from live. I mean, that might be another reason I'm not that interested. I'm interested in following some players. I'm interested in how guys I know are doing. Guys who are trying to forge their way, but the rest of it's not to me.
I'm with you. I mean, the whole thing needed a damn good shake. I mean, there was a real, especially in the PGA Tour. There's a huge complacency and insularity there that needed to change, and hopefully it will. I have my doubts, but hopefully it will. And I look at it from a DP World European Tour point of view. I think that there's a real strong possibility that the best thing for them would be if the whole thing just fell apart and the PGA Tour went off and did their PGA Tour thing, and somehow everybody else got together and created a tour that went everywhere else except America. I mean, I'd watch that. Can you imagine some of the courses they could go to? And it would be terrific.
Well, that might be that might be Mr. Trump's goal anyway, wouldn't it?
Well, possibly. First. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. It needs a bit of a shake-up. And what Liv has created is not the shape. And I've got nothing against the guys going there and and doing it. I completely understand the temptation of that, and I think the where the money comes from is, as I said, while that regime there and the is there's nothing admirable about that. I think we're to try and expect individuals to make a stand on that when we won't do it collectively. To me, is pretty hypocritical. So, but the teams thing isn't really teams thing, is it? What makes the Ryder Cups and Presidents Cups interesting is it's different formats and trying to pair guys together and see and against other pairs and individuals that play a different way. Well, there's none of that, is there? It's just basically best three out of four. Well, that's not
yeah. So okay. So well, my last question to you on all of this. I'm conscious we've talked for an hour and 15 minutes already, but what would be your hope that what will come out the far end of this? What's the end result? The ideal was your hope for it, not what you think will going to happen, but what would be your hope for what comes out?
To be honest, John, I haven't even thought about it. I'm watching from afar and I can see what I don't like. I don't think just more and more multimillionaires, playing for. I mean, this whole idea that the more money, the more competitive it will be. It's completely the opposite, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't. It doesn't. It was interesting. Well, the one interesting thing, if you watched that Dubai event, to me was, you've got Tyrrell Hatton coming down the stretch against Dan Hillier. Well, Hillier's got to hit it in the grandstands on the last because he has to protect second. Yeah. Because $1 million or whatever it is for second is career changing for him. And Tyrrell doesn't have that issue, right? He takes it in the water and takes 10 there. It doesn't matter, right? I mean, so what's really interesting, and that's why Ryder Cups and that are interesting because it doesn't matter how much money you got in your pocket, it matters the same to everybody, and everybody's in that, and as soon as you create that such a massive differentiation in circumstances, then you kind of lose a part of the competitive element, and I think you're never going to solve that issue without recognising it, and I don't see any recognition of that at the moment.
On that note, Greg Turner, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. Always been fun talking to you, and I've enjoyed this very much. I hope you have too.
Thanks, Huggy. Always great to talk.
As I said at the start, thoughtful, intelligent, and eloquent. It really is a perfect combination for an in-depth podcast. And a big thanks to both Greg and Huggy for taking the time to bring it to us. Well, that's it for episode 135, but I hope you've made the effort to follow the show on your preferred podcast app so that you don't miss our next.
It's certainly a long time from the days of the mid-70s of the flare trousers and the big hair and good golf to nay hair.
That's two-time Walker Cup captain Colin Dalgleish. Next time on The Thing About Golf.